World War One: A History from Beginning to End. Introduction. The First World War, known at the time as the Great War, was a 4-year conflict that spanned the globe, involving 32 countries in total. It was an unforeseen war that resulted from a series of calamities that broke the delicate arrangement of European powers and ended with the loss of over 11 million military personnel and 7 million civilians. What had started as a diplomatic feud brought on by the assassination of a monarch erupted into a conflict that engulfed the world and changed the map of Europe forever. The war brought about revolution. It ended empires, dissolved monarchies, and led to the development of war machines that play a crucial role in the modern conflicts of today. It was thought at the time that the war would not last more than a few months, and that victory would be won easily and without much cost. However, as the months turned into years and the war spread like hellfire, it scorched Europe and surrounding continents. Entire cities were leveled, genocides were committed, and exploited for strategic advantage, and all sides were hit with immense losses. The war quickly became one of attrition, with mass slaughter the strategy and marginal gains the result. It was a new war being fought with old tactics, an industrialized grinding machine that ended the lives of so many. Follow now as we explore one of the darkest and deadliest periods in modern history, the First World War. Chapter 1, 1914. Blood is spilled. The precarious geography of Europe in 1914 was a considerable and inevitable catalyst for agitation. On the outset of war, the continent was split by powerful nations and congealed into opposing alliances that faced each other with strong militaristic and industrial vigor. Europe was divided into two major alliances, the Triple Entente, an Anglo-Russian agreement between the Russian Empire, the French Third Republic, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and the Triple Alliance, which was formed of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Kingdom of Italy. Prior to the beginning of the 20th century, Europe had been in a state of total conflict. A great number of wars had been fought to secure land, expand borders, and form new countries. By 1871, the nation of Germany was in its infancy. It had grown from a confederation of German states into an overbearing empire, having massively expanded its industrial and colonial interest. In 1979, Germany, with a desire for further European and Baltic expansion, took advantage of the waning Austro-Hungarian Empire and formed a dual alliance to protect against possible Russian aggression in the Baltic regions. In 1882, Italy, fearing conflict with France after the latter took colonial territory from her in Tunisia, signed the Triple Alliance Agreement with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Italy's alliance to its previous enemy, Austria-Hungary, was met with some incredulity from the Italian public. The agreement promised the protection of each nation if they were to be attacked by antagonist empires. The Triple Alliance Agreement was renewed in 1887, 1907, and 1912. However, in 1902, Italy made a secret pact with France, promising to remain neutral if Germany provoked France. The flimsy agreement of the Triple Alliance had started to falter. Germany, with an agenda for supporting Austria-Hungary in acquiring land in the Baltic region, fancied itself as the successor to the Austro-Hungarian Empire as it faced a slow but inevitable collapse. Italy was restless. It viewed its place in Europe as that of an isolated nation. It too had ambitions of becoming an empire and sought to grab territory in the Baltic regions as well as in the Mediterranean and Africa. In opposition, the Franco-Russian alliance signed in 1894 was an agreement that promised that if either nation were to be attacked by a member of the Triple Alliance, each would aid its ally in defense. The treaty also stipulated that should any member of the Triple Alliance begin mass mobilization of its military, France and Russia would respond in kind. Great Britain had been in a state of splendid isolation over affairs in Europe. Its interest lay in attaining more land areas in order to preserve its empire and Commonwealth. But by 1904, Britain had growing concerns about the power the nation of the Triple Alliance had amassed and was persuaded by France to agree to a treaty. The agreement resolved their conflict over colonial interest in Africa. The Entente Cordiale put an end to centuries of aggression between the two countries and settled significant differences. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Russian Entente was a treaty agreed in 1907 between Great Britain and Russia. It settled British and Russian animosities surrounding control of countries in Persia, Mesopotamia, and Asia. The Triple Entente agreed in 1907 was of somewhat reluctant and partially neutral treaty between Great Britain, France, and Russia. The goal was to form a strong counterforce against potential aggression of the Triple Alliance and to retaliate if any ally were to be attacked by the nations of the Triple Alliance. To this day, there is still a debate among historians as to which of a plethora of possible events led to the outbreak of the First World War. The most commonly agreed cause, and perhaps the most seismic event, was the assassination of the Archduke of Austria-Hungary. On June 20, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Duchess Sophie Chotek of Austria, were assassinated whilst on a state visit to Sarajevo in Austro-Hungarian Bosnia. The assassination was a 19-year-old nationalist, Gavrilo Princip. Princip was a member of the pan-Slavist, ultra-nationalist Serbian group known as the Black Hand Society. Princip was with 7 other would-be assassins that day who also resented the Austro-Hungarian annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina and dreamed of a free and independent Serbia and a greater kingdom uniting all Slavs which became Yugoslavia. Though there is no doubt that these men, Princip included, acquired their weapons and training in Belgrade, Serbia, history has ruled out any official involvement by the Serbian government in the assassination of the Archduke. Nonetheless, Austria-Hungary declared that Serbia was complicit in the assassination and held it accountable. On the 5th of July, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the Emperor of Germany, signed what became known as Germany's blank check. He promised full solidarity with Austria-Hungary. Even if they declared war on Serbia, the Kaiser decreed that Germany would not yield in its support of Austro-Hungarian aggression into Serbia, even if it resulted in conflict with Russia. The Hungarian Prime Minister István Tisza, whose approval among others was required in the order to launch an attack on Serbia, was highly skeptical of any action that could incur the military might of Russia. Instead, he and other Austro-Hungarian leaders elected to issue Serbia an ultimatum. The intention of some was to demand that the ultimatum be so damaging, so humiliating, and punishing that Serbia would have no option but to reject it, thus leading to the war that some Austro-Hungarian politicians intently craved. The ultimatum was tantamount to the loss of Serbian sovereignty to Austria-Hungary. Serbia rejected the impossible ultimatum on the 25th of July, 37 days after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. 3 days later, on July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, though it took some time before she fully mobilized her forces along the border. In a final effort to avoid all-out war across Europe, Sir Edward Grey, the British Foreign Secretary, proposed peace talks between all sides. However, his plea was rejected by Kaiser Wilhelm. War looked inevitable. Russia began to mobilize her forces. Germany, aware that war with Russia was unavoidable, prepared to fight a war on two fronts, knowing that with Russian involvement, she would be met with aggression from France. On the 1st of August, Germany declared war on Russia, and both sides began to mobilize their forces along their respective borders. France also mobilized to face German forces at the border. In the days that followed, Italy dismantled the delicate Pact of Triple Alliance when, soon after the outbreak of war, she decided to remain neutral and not follow her allies into armed conflict, citing that the proposing of the Triple Alliance was for defense, not aggression. Germany insisted that Belgium provide passage of German troops through her borders. The plan exercised by Germany, known as the Schlieffen Plan, was to flank the French forces mobilized along the border by entering Belgium and circling behind the French front. Then, after what was planned to be a quick defeat, Germany would withdraw vast swaths of her military to meet the Russians. The Treaty of London, signed in 1839, was an agreement brokered by the Great Britain between the major nations of Europe, guaranteeing Belgium's neutrality and sovereignty after she broke away from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. The Schlieffen Plan, that had been in development for 9 years prior to the war, ignored Belgium's neutrality and was considered as an act of war. Britain demanded that Germany cease her march into Belgium and withdraw. On the 4th of August, after Germany ignored the demands to halt the incursion, Britain declared war on Germany. Germany's first attack was an assault on the town of Liege. The heavily fortified area held off the German offensive by about 5 days, though it sustained heavy losses for its efforts. Liege fell on the 16th of August, which granted German forces uninterrupted passage to France. France initiated Plan 17, a long-standing plan of mobilization in the event of war with Germany. French forces crossed the German frontier, unaware that Germany was planning to enter France via Belgium. The head-on assault incurred substantial losses on both sides, and France retreated. Britain and France declared war on Austria-Hungary on the 12th of August. Following the declaration, a British expeditionary force landed in France and marched to the Western Front. The first significant battle at sea took place on the 20th of August, when a British naval squadron sunk 3 German cruisers off the coast of Helgoland. The British had a superior navy and were able to enforce a blockade in the North Sea. The aim was to prevent supplies from reaching the Central Powers, the remaining members of the Triple Alliance. The blockade lasted from 1914 until 1919, when it was lifted 8 months after armistice. At Mons, on the frontier between Belgium and France, the British expeditionary force attempted to hold land against the advancing German forces. Britain inflicted a fair deal of damage to Germans, but it was left heavily outnumbered and vulnerable following the retreat of France's Fifth Army. Britain too was forced to withdraw. On the 5th of September, British and French forces halted their retreat and held ground at the Marne River to prevent the German incursion from reaching Paris. The following day, the Germans caught up with Allied forces, and the Battle of the Marne began. The Allied efforts succeed in preventing the advancing German force from reaching Paris and pushed them back towards the border, but at the combined cost of over 500,000 men from each side. In the weeks that followed, Allied and Central Powers began a race to the sea, an attempt by both sides to gain ground in unoccupied territory along the French northern flank. There were a total of 12 battles fought during this time, culminating at the Battle of Ypres. From that point, both Allied and Central Powers began a new tactic by which to hold and gain ground: trench warfare. Both sides dug trenches that stretched from the Channel to Switzerland. The vast trench networks, which can approximately 350 miles, formed the Western Front. In August, Britain, France, and Germany began a series of assaults in Africa. From August 9th to the 26th, Britain and France mounted a successful offensive into German-occupied Togoland, forcing the German army to surrender or desert. Meanwhile, on the 15th, German forces advanced into British-controlled Kenya and seized the town of Taveta. On the 17th of August, Russia invaded East Prussia. The intention was to gain land from the German forces whilst keeping them occupied on the Eastern Front, thereby relieving some pressure on the Allied forces on the Western Front. However, Germany scored a huge victory at the end of August in the Battle of Tenerberg. Germany crushed Russia's Second Army. Between the 7th and 14th of September, the Russian armies were poured from Prussia by German forces and pushed back behind the Eastern Front. Towards the end of August and into early September, Austria-Hungary failed to make any significant gains against Serbia and was forced to retreat from its botched invasion into Russia. The World War was now at war. Japan had stayed true to its agreement with its British allies and declared war on Germany. The Ottoman Empire had joined the Central Powers and quickly closed the Dardanelles Strait, a vital shipping route to Allied forces. European colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East began maneuvers to weaken the other side's forces and hold territory. The war heralded new advancements in technological warfare. The German U-boat submarines had proven to be an effective attacker of British warships. 1914 also saw the first use of airplanes in the theater of war. Chiefly used for reconnaissance at the outbreak of the war, the airplane was quickly established as a vital and deadly tool in aiding military operations. Christmas brought a brief truce to the Western Front. Allied and Central forces climbed out of their trenches and played sports, ate and drank together, and played music, which provided festive respite from the bitter winter conflict. However, the truce was very short-lived, and in the days that followed, enemies who had become friends retook their arms and aimed their sights at one another. The Great War merged into the new year, having vastly overrun its predicted length. Thousands had been lost, towns had been destroyed, and people displaced. The numbers far outweighed the pre-war estimations. A heavy cloud had descended on Europe, shrouding it in the shadow of war.